Welcome to Shop Talk, everyone. I'm Brandy.
And I'm James, and we talk about all things related to cross-cultural workers and mental health.
Thanks for joining us, and welcome to Season 4.
Welcome back to Shop Talk with Brandy and James. We're excited to have Dr. Lee Long, with 25 years of practice in the clinical field, heads up restoration counseling in Fort Worth. He holds a doctorate in counseling with a focus on traumatology from Liberty University, a master's in counseling from Dallas Theological Seminary, and a bachelor's in psychology from the University of North Texas. Over his extensive career, he has gained experience in juvenile detention programs, residential treatment, psychiatric hospitals, and private practice. Dr. Long specializes in working with individuals dealing with addiction, couples facing relational challenges, and individuals suffering from depression and life adjustments. Certified in cognitive behavior analysis systems of psychotherapy, Dr. Long is also intensely trained in dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, PIT, and is EMDR certified. These certifications and trainings allow him to offer specialized support to those dealing with chronic depression, among other issues. And that's what we're here to talk today about, depression. Anything else you want to add to about your experience and training and background?
No, you covered it well. You covered it well. Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here. We've talked about depression on the podcast before, but it's a big topic, and I think there really are a lot of different ways you can approach it and talk about it. So we're interested to hear today about your experience and working with it. And I'm really interested to start off, talk about your experience with cognitive behavior analysis system of psychotherapy. Do y'all call it CBASP or what is?
Yes, that's great.
Yes.
We call it CBASP, and
Okay.
a lot of people think that you're ordering a seafood entree, but it's
Chilean
not.
sea bass.
Right, exactly. But it's CBASP, and what's so interesting, I love that we're getting to talk about this because CBASP is such a great modality, but a lot of times people misunderstand what CBASP is because of that cognitive behavioral piece. A lot of people wrap it into a CBT third wave, that there's a lot of there's a book that was published in 2015, and it's in that third wave of CBT literature line, and it is absolutely not CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's more of an interpersonal model. And I don't know if you all are familiar with, or your listeners are familiar with, what interpersonal models are all about, but it's that space between me as the therapist and you as the client or patient. And in CBASP, one of the things that we utilize is what the founder, his name is James McCullough, or Jim McCullough. And if you know him by Big Jim. So henceforth, we'll refer to him as Big Jim. So Big Jim wrote this he wrote a book in 2006 because he needed to write this book. And the book was called Disciplined Personal Involvement. And the reason why he laid all of that out is because CBASP requires that you as a therapist become personally involved. Now, I don't mean you go grab coffee with them or you share recipes with them. You're not going to invite them to, your birthday party. It's not like that. But you become professionally, emotionally, relationally involved with the people that you're treating. Because the idea is that this is a theory for chronically depressed individuals. And with chronically depressed individuals, there is a history, typically, especially early onset, there is typically a history of trauma. Early childhood trauma, neglect, abuse, something in their history. And they do not know, there's never been a learning opportunity on how to attach. And so you as the therapist become that person that you encourage them to attach to. But you also have to be willing to give them feedback. And what I mean by this, like an example of this is, I was working with this gentleman recently, and one of the things that you'll frequently see is that, where there's avoidance, it is 9 times out of 8, yes, I do math, but it is typically, overwhelmingly, fear is present. tend to avoid what we fear. And when you see people who are chronically depressed, you see fear avoidance. That's one of the biggest issues with that. They're fear avoidant, and the second biggest issue is that they are perceptually disconnected, meaning their environment does not inform them. So this amazing man was sitting here talking to me, and he said something about, well, and I know you're thinking this. And I said, well, hold on a second. Hold on a second. I said, why did you kick me out of the conversation? He's like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you're thinking for me, and I don't know where I fit here. And he stopped and he said, well, I did that. I was like, yes. We walked through what that was like for me. I said, it makes me feel like you're wanting me out of the room. I don't know how to connect with that. I'm not sure what you're trying to tell me with that. Do you not want me to talk to you? Do you like, I'm not sure. He stopped and he said, nobody has ever said anything like that to me before. And he said, I do this to my wife all the time. And what you're saying sounds similar, but now I see what it does to you. And every time he starts to read my mind in session, he'll say, oh, I know you don't like that. And I'll stop him and say, why do you know I don't like that? He'll say, because you've told me. Okay. So talk to me that way. You've told me that I don't like that. So I'm not going to do that. And it really is in a very gentle but pointed way, raising these individuals up because they're very pre-operational.
Explain that a little bit. But maybe some of our listeners don't have that same
The
vocabulary.
pre-operational part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Piaget, Jean Piaget, was a theorist who talked about different stages of development. And the pre-operational stage was sort of like, and I hate using this term because it sounds negative and this is not the intent, but it's the pre-operational stage is the toddler stage. And it's where there's, gosh, the associations are pretty elementary. There's there's not a whole lot of inferences that are understood. And so these individuals operate like little boys and little girls, like very regressed human beings. Now, you may be thinking, based on that description, well, does that mean that these individuals are like they have a low IQ? Or, oh gosh, no. Most of the people that I have treated in the chronic depression category are incredibly intelligent, and they're typically successful in their field, but their field does not involve much interpersonal communication or require much interpersonally from them.
And it probably couldn't. There was probably certain limitations they had on their way of engaging with people that prevented them from pursuing an alternate path.
That's right.
But they're intelligent enough, they found the one that worked.
That's right.
That's interesting. As we work with cross-cultural workers, our organization tends to have really highly intelligent, motivated people that, I'm trying to think of how to word this, James, but
Be nice.
we're part of this organization too. So, but we're not really operating in an understanding of our, what do you say, interpersonal relationships. Yes.
Let's just say I'm helping write a course right now on emotional intelligence called The Art of Leading Yourself. Because it's a gap. Now, I believe we probably have 10% on the spectrum, which is abnormally high. So you kind of throw that into the mix. But I think what I hear you talking about, especially if trauma was a part of it, there's a major role trauma probably has to play in a lot of people getting stuck in that kind of pre-development, pre-operational stage, those adverse childhood experiences that keep them from learning some of those ways of connecting. It just wasn't safe. So they had to kind of pivot.
That's right. And you think about and I think, Brandy, you bring up such a good point, not just about a particular organization, but I think as our, at least here in the States, that largely our culture has lost that sense of personal, that drive or desire for much interpersonal experience. I don't know what to put behind the interpersonal part, but we don't seek things interpersonally as much. And the interesting thing about what we found with CBASP is, like I said, there's two major issues with the chronically depressed, and that is the pervasive fear avoidance and this inability to perceive it's a perceptual disconnection, meaning the way that I take in the world is very disconnected from the world,
Mm.
which there's a lot, that's where all the mind reading comes in. And mind reading is dangerous, so dangerous. And so the two problems of chronic depression being fear avoidance and perceptual disconnection, there's the two goals of CBASP are felt dyadic safety, meaning felt safety between you and the therapist, learning that there's that between you and this one person, that you can find safety. And that is accomplished by an exercise that you do in the therapy session called interpersonal discrimination exercise. And that's where you teach them that they have what we call, there are so many acronyms in CBAS. So buckle up.
All right. Big James needs to be careful with all these acronyms.
He does.
Can
Big
they can they be mistaken for fish, like sea bass?
I can see a theme.
Yes, there could be, although that might be fishy. But so the the IDE, the interpersonal discrimination exercise, is formulated through what's called the SOH, or the significant other history. And that's the second session. You're sitting down with somebody and you're developing the significant other history. So they pick 5 or so people that they've had through their life that have left a real big mark on them, good or bad. Because I want to know what's going to inform your relationship with me. And let's put it right out here in the open. If you're going to expect me to be like your father, I want to know what your father was like, so I understand your expectations of me, so that I can show you that I'm different. And I'm going to point it out. As Big Jim says often, I'm going to rub your nose in it. I'm going to rub your nose in it. And he doesn't mean that rudely. It's just I really want that learning to take place, because this is an acquisition learning model. So the next, that part is the transference hypothesis you develop, because we all have a transference hypothesis. We believe the world is going to treat us a certain way. All of us have that. When you were raised, as some people say, by a pack of wolves, then your transference hypothesis of another person is going to be pretty fierce. And again, you just want to know that. So that's the felt safety, the fear avoidance. You have the felt safety that's accomplished through the interpersonal discrimination exercise. The second issue is that perceptual disconnection, or the way that I receive the world or interpret the world is very disconnected from the actual world itself. And that second, the goal is that sense of perceptual awareness. Okay, or what we call it in CBASP is perceived functionality. So we want you to be functional in the way that you receive the world, meaning that you come out from behind that shield, if you will, and not allowing the world to inform you. You come out from behind that shield and you begin to interact. There's that interpersonal theme. And in this, we use what's called an essay. And when I first heard that, I wasn't sure if that was a slang term for a friend. I wasn't sure if I was an essay, but it's literally an S and an A, standing for situational analysis. And the heart behind the situation analysis, or the essay, is that you are taking problematic events and you're helping them have a beginning, middle, and end point of a situation. In other words, it cannot be global, right? Because with
Right.
globalization is one of the biggest issues. So you have a beginning, middle, and end, and you walk them through this, and you have what's called means end thinking, or goal directed thinking. I want you to be thinking at every situation you find yourself in. I want you to be thinking, what's the start point and what's the end point? And what do I want out of me at the end of this situation? And we work with them to the point to where they are constantly saying, well, my desired outcome was this. Well, did you get it? Yes. Great. Let's write it up here on the board and let's work it through and see how'd you get what you wanted. In the beginning, a lot of times people say, well, what's your desired outcome? Well, I wanted them to, and I will say, no, 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 no. You can't control your environment.
That's a bad goal.
Yes, it is. You can control you in the environment. And so then it's teaching them where they are. And the exciting part is that you see people sort of blossom, and to me it's almost like they wake up for the first time out of this deep slumber of protection.
Mm.
And they see
and isolation.
Oh,
Because
isolation.
that's the thing with depression, right? It's so isolating.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you're sounds like you're creating that lifeline from the therapist chair of saying connection, not
Yeah.
alone. Like,
Yes.
And and Dr. Long, as the therapist, I mean, excuse my language here, but I mean, you've got to know your own shit going into this because, like,
You do.
you're forming this really intimate relationship with your client, and you've got to know what you bring of yourself and your own junk into it because yeah, that sounds really interesting to me.
I am so glad you said that. And I'm so glad for the way you said it too.
I mean, she's still got to put $1 in the swear jar, but
I'll
Keeping
put
it
it,
in. I'm editing. I'm keeping it in.
I'll put it, yes, you're right. And one of the things that I think that we don't do as therapists, if we don't know ourselves, that's the difference between somebody who does harm and somebody who's helpful. Because if I don't realize, 17 years ago, I lost both of my parents 5 weeks apart. I was in my early 30s, and both of them 5 weeks to the day passed.
wow.
And I thought I needed to just keep powering through until I realized there was an amazing, sweet family that had lost one of their parents. And they asked me, would I please come be a part of their healing? And I realized I couldn't do it.
Mm.
And it was me having to tap out. And look, I was not happy about that because I thought I should be able to summit any mountain you put in front of me. And I had to say, nope, if you want to call that a weakness, whatever you want to call it. And what I looked at is I'm not God,
Mm.
and I can't do that. And so having the wherewithal to know that I needed to step back and offer community, I needed to offer another professional for that. But yes, you need to
Mm.
know.
How does it, I mean, what you're describing requires, let's just say, energy and effort, which is sometimes in short supply, particularly for those who are chronically depressed or experiencing a major depressive episode? Or do you also use this with bipolar? What's the,
It's
how
been
do you navigate that?
Great question. It has been normed solely on chronic depression.
Okay.
But I do know that other professionals, now there's no empirical data on this.
Hmm.
Jim is a big data man. He loves that empirical data, and I love that about him. Um, but there are other folks anecdotally who have used the CBASP with the depressive part of bipolar.
Hmm.
And I think it's been successful, but there's no empirical data on that.
What about just the energy? I mean, the part of that you need people to really show up and be engaged, which is for those who are kind of chronically depressed, sometimes that's in short supply.
That's a great question. The one of the things I think that we have to reconsider as therapists, if you get to show up and be James, if you get to show up and be Brandy, if I get to show up and I get to be Lee, then the energy gets turned up just a little bit because I'm
Hmm.
not walking around like David with this hand-to-hand combat armor that was way too
Hmm.
big for him anyway. because he wasn't being who he was called to be, right? He was a
Shepherd.
right who had a slingshot.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, anyway, he was a slingshot man. There's a term for
Slingshotist. Yes.
this. He was a slingshotist. He was not a hand-to-hand combat guy who was going to go fight this big, huge giant. But sometimes I feel like we armor up and think that we've got to Gumby around, twist
Mm.
ourselves up, and be a hand-to-hand combat guy when we're not that guy. We're not that girl. You know what I'm saying? We're not that person.
Mm.
Therefore, the energy, number one, you show up and you get to be you. Number two, I've worked with chronic depression. I've been doing this for 25 years. And I will say that I've worked with chronic depression most of those 25 years. Well, the last 7 or 8 years, Big Jim has been my mentor.
Mm.
He has helped me go from feeling so weighted down, trying to be that armor bearer when I'm not suited for that. I'm a slingshotist. I am not a hand to hand combat guy. Right. So, one of the things that I've seen is that when you walk through CBASP, you actually have an infusion of energy because I'm not going to outwork you.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to form a relationship and I'm not going to outwork you. I'm not going to pull you along. And if I feel like I'm pulling you along, I'm going to tell you, I feel like I'm pulling you along. Where's the engagement?
Mm.
Let's talk it through. So that aspect of it, I think, is it does give energy. I will say though, in the beginning, there it does require a little more energy because you're doing a lot of front load teaching.
Right.
And in the beginning, it's interesting because you do of situation analysis and interpersonal discrimination exercise. Those are the two tasks or the two exercises in CBASP. Of those, you're going to do 70% of the time or so, you're going to be doing an essay, a situation analysis. And about 30% of the time, you're going to be doing an interpersonal discrimination exercise or an IDE. And what you find is that 30% of the time is very much front loaded at the beginning of treatment. Why? Because once they learn to discriminate you from their parent or you from
Mm-hmm.
their significant other, then you don't have to keep going back to it because learning has been acquired and it changes the dynamic in that interpersonal relationship. And I'll tell you a quick story if that's.
Yeah.
There was a young man that I was working with, and he was early on in treatment, and he was late, and he was late. He was 5 minutes behind the time that his appointment was. In my world, that is on time. And he was super, super nervous about coming back with me. And I was like, "Hey, come on, let's head back to the office from the waiting area." And he was like, I know I'm late. Are you gonna fire me? Are you gonna tell me that I can't come back?" And I was like, no, no, like, wait, I'm so confused. Like, let's talk this through. He said, "Well, I was late." And I said, "Okay. Did you get caught by a train or what happened? Are you okay?" Well, yeah, I'm fine. I just didn't plan well. So, oh, all right. That's fine. Okay, grab a seat. And I could tell he just wasn't settling in. Finally, I looked at him and I said, "Hey, let me ask you a question." I said, "If you were late for your," and mom was the very abusive part.
Mm-hmm.
"You were late for mom, what would have happened?" Oh man, and I mean, I stood up at the whiteboard, and I just started
Mm-hmm.
writing. She would have yelled at me. She would have cussed at me. She would have told me what an idiot I was. I mean, bam, 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 bam.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just a river of words. And I said, "Okay, I think that about covers it. Do you think that covers it?" He looked up at the board. He was like, "Yep, that's exactly right." Kind of read it back to me. I
Yeah.
said, "How did I respond?" Y'all, he had no clue what I was
Mm.
asking him. I said,
Right.
"What was behavior?" And he said, "What? I don't understand." I said, "What did I do?"
5 minutes ago. What
Right,
did you do? Yeah.
right. He had no clue. So I finally had to
Yeah.
say, "Was I yelling?" "No." "Okay. How did you find my voice?" It was very peaceful. Okay, so I wrote down peaceful. And then we went through, and finally he looked at me and he goes, huh.
Mm.
I said, so what does this mean what does this mean for us? And his answer was fascinating. He said, well, this one time, you're not like my mom.
Yep.
You want to talk about hardwired?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
goes, right? But the encouragement was at the end of treatment, this young man was at an event and he was really, really talking negatively to himself internally.
Mm.
And he looked at himself in the mirror and he said, what would Lee say right now? Turn the relationship got in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, I walked out of that bathroom 10 feet tall. And I said, well, what did I say?
Yeah.
He went through a list of things that I had said to him in the past.
Mm.
I was like, that's it. He had formed an attachment. He had internalized me as a person who would not bring harm to him because I wasn't going to. And from that, his depression went for the first time in his life, his depression was in the normal range.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah. So when you think about the energy level, and sorry that I went on so long about energy and the
No,
whole,
that's great.
Yeah.
but the energy in all of this is that it's really allowing yourself to be you.
Mm.
The greatest gift that God gave you was you. Now use it.
It's hard to separate what you're talking about. Ted was on a couple podcast episodes ago talking about attachment and how attachment theory impacts our attachment to God. And even thinking through this client, you just described somebody with such difficult early attachment experiences with a caregiver, how much that impacts our ability to attach to God. It just so shapes it. I mean, it's very Kurt Thompson-esque in terms of that hardwiring attachment, interpersonal neurobiology approach to all relationships.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Kurt Thompson is doing some amazing work with that. And I agree with you. And the interesting thing is that the beauty of flipping that on its head, right? When you interact
Mm.
with these individuals, how beautiful it is for them to create space in their world for you as the professional and for you then to differentiate yourself from everybody else that they've ever experienced. And they do this over and over and over again. And that you get to just my presence and offering them this interpersonal relationship gets to be a healing balm to their soul.
Mm.
It's a little bit out of order, but I wonder if you could rewind just a little bit and talk some about depression and chronic depression. I see certainly episodic fairly frequently, sometimes connected to stress, burnout, failure across kind of a wide range. I see it more common in male cross-cultural workers, particularly that episodic one. But we do get people with, I think, chronic depression who perhaps found their way into this particular type of work because they could do it and they could kind of pull it off. But it just impacts all parts of who they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, and two, I think we find people who maybe see this as a way out of their depression. If it is an attachment related to attachment, if they can do things to make God like them too, or do things to
Mm,
whatever, form an attachment in that way.
earn it.
So,
Yeah.
I think that's a really well said comment that we make him in our image instead of recognizing we are made in his. And if you go back and you read Genesis, God did not curse man. I challenge you to find that and email me because you're not going to email me because it's not there unless you've rewritten the Bible. But and we'll talk about that a whole different day.
that'd be a great conversation.
But God did not curse man. I don't believe he's going to curse his own image. He cursed the ground from which we came. And I think that's where people get confused and think he cursed man. He did not curse man. He cursed the ground and he cursed the serpent.
Mm.
Right. And so in you look at when he says is it in First John, he says, if you say you love me but hate your brother, you are a liar. And I've thought about that a lot. When you go back to the greatest command that Jesus, the one and one only time that Jesus answered a question direct,
Yeah.
out of parable, one and only time. He's talking to the sends away the Pharisees. The Sadducee attorney comes. I say slithering. I'm sorry for all of you who are attorneys. I don't mean that in a bad way. Comes slithering up to him and says, "Okay, Rabbi, of all of these laws, two good Jews knew there were 613 laws. Which one's the greatest? Love. Thank you, Bono. Love is the highest law. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind." And what's the second one? The second one's much like the first, is that you would love your neighbor how? The way you love yourself. And so it comes back to, we can't make God in our image. That's loving ourselves first or putting others before us. But we have to love God so we know who we are, so then we know how to love other people. And, I think, James, talking about just the idea of depression in of itself, we get so overwhelmed with who we think we're supposed to be.
Mm.
And we go
Yep.
global. And you look at that sense of overarching globalization. Well, I'm not very good. I must be bad at that. And we start trying to interpret ourselves. And I think one of the big reasons why God calls us into community is for this understanding of, no, I need James and I need Brandy to tell me if I'm being too long-winded,
Mm.
because I don't know. Am I, or am I doing exactly what you had hoped would be done? You see what I'm saying? Like, there has to be a back and forth. And that's that beauty of the interpersonal piece of what we should be doing. Let me take away should.
Thank you.
Because our last one, we just said don't shit on
Invita-
yourself, so you
Yeah,
can't,
that's right.
can't shit.
Shouldn't.
Yeah.
An invitation, I think.
Yeah. But what I hope that we would be doing is
Mm.
leaving that open space for us, right? To in whatever capacity we find ourselves, the interpersonal is required. It's necessary. It's part of our image bearing.
Mm.
Yeah.
We need feedback. That's why when you go to the gym, you find a gym, you either have a workout buddy or you find a gym that has a mirror. You're looking for feedback.
Right.
And by
So
the way, you're not being too long-winded. This is an excellent conversation. I'm really enjoying this.
thank you. Thanks for that feedback.
Yeah. um,
Go ahead.
I was thinking about, the CBASP approach sounds so really, really good and intense and involved. And we work with people who live in isolated situations who may not have access to be able to participate in something like this. And I know you can't boil it down to just do this when you go home and you'll be fine, because that's not it. But, thinking about chronic depression from the perspective of CBASP and thinking about people who work in isolated situations, are there, principles that people can just have to chew on, until they're able to be at a point where they can interact with a counselor in this way?
I think that's a great question. I think that when I think number one, it's start recognizing. Um, well, let me back up a second. I am actually in the process of writing a book about CBAS from that perspective of, if you can't get to therapy and you're not necessarily trying to get to therapy, you're just looking for, how can I change my life? How really the premise of the whole book is, how can I show up better?
Mm.
And the aspects of CBASP are thread through this, because while I think that CBASP principles are just good life principles. And I think the beginning of that is that, do I have a person? I think about the idea in especially Christian circles is, do I have an accountability partner? And accountability partners, though, have, I think, been turned into this, what have you done wrong?
That's right.
It's like, whoa, no, 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 not at all. It's, how am I experiencing you? And rather than coming at this from a right and wrong, and hopefully that does not really give people heartburn to take away that idea of right and wrong, but it's that space of saying, how am I experiencing this? What's going on here? Where am I in all of this? And then where is this other individual? And is there a way, an avenue that I might be able to communicate this to them? And then back to me.
Hmm.
Really experiencing what interpersonal appropriate intimacy looks like. That would be step one-ish.
Yeah.
That'd be 1A-ish. 1B-ish would be to begin thinking about what is my desired outcome for things? Am I seeing situations that happen in my world? Do I see them with a beginning and an end? Or are they just one long thing that I can never impact? Or can I just look at one interaction and can I say, what was the end point? And what we talk about in CBASP is what was the consequence of that or the actual outcome?
Hmm.
And what would I want the outcome to be? How would I want that to be different? What can I do to make that outcome different? And I think if we think about things from what, the means end or the goal directed thinking, then I think we start. I was talking with Big Jim, and we had this really cool request to come teach to one of the European therapeutic congresses, like the psychological congresses. And we were teaching CBAS to a big group there, and he said, well, what's your desired outcome? And I said, well, my desired outcome is that they, and I said, I know it's not supposed to be about them. He goes, no, 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 finish your sentence. I said that they would learn CBASP. And he said, okay, then what do you need to put into place for you to meet that? And I said, well, I want to communicate very clearly. I want to be able to articulate the principles. He said, there's your desired outcome. Giddy up, cowboy. You know what I'm saying? So there's that space where we get to look at it from that perspective of what do we want to turn out here? Now, how can I impact that?
I can definitely picture in my head many clients I've worked with who were just stuck. I think that chronic depressiveness is often a place of being stuck. They probably have tried various things, maybe perhaps medication at various points, maybe, but mostly you're just stuck and lonely.
They are stuck, they're lonely, they wear the moniker of depression, the helplessness and hopelessness. They wear that to the depths.
I wonder if it's a sense of familiarity too. If you have lived with depression for so long that it's almost scary to think of living life without it because you know in a way how to live with depression.
Yes,
Right.
and when you think about the two core issues, that fear avoidance, because see, I'm afraid to think that life could be any different, and that perceptual disconnection, meaning the way I receive the world. And they don't receive the world the same way that most people do. And that's not to make them bad or horrible or anything. It just is to say that they just weren't taught.
Right.
They
They
just
didn't
weren't.
have the privilege of developing it
No, they did
for
not.
whatever reason. Yeah.
Well, and the beauty of CBAS, but one thing I forgot to mention is that this is CBAS began in the 1970s, and it has been empirically normed, and I mean and put to the test.
Mm.
Lexapro, Fazodone. I mean, all of these different. It's been put to the test with all these pharmaceuticals or pharmaceutical
Mm.
companies, and it has been it's won the day.
Mm.
It's been the big player,
Well, because
and
it's not treating the symptom, it's treating the cause.
that's that interpersonal play.
Right.
That's right. They learn to. Jim wrote a book. It was his memoir, and he wrote the first half of the book is his memoir, and the second half of the book is how he developed CBASP.
Hmm.
It's called "Swimming Upstream: How to Become Human," or "How I Became Human," or something like that. But it's called "Swimming Upstream" by James P. McCullough, and I just think that he talks often because he went through a long bout with chronic depression when he was early onset, had a hard, horrible uh, early childhood life, and no connection, no attachment. It just was in a therapist in his 20s who was actually an analyst, broke all the psychoanalytic rules and talked to him like a peer and just said, Big Jim, come on. Nobody believes that. Buck up, and it just give it. Come on, Jim. I feel like you're selling me up the river here. I don't know. Now he was hard on him, right? And I'm not advocating for being hard on all your people, but that spoke to Jim. And it was somebody who grabbed a hold of him, spoke his language, and he could see the light. And it was not an oncoming train in the tunnel.
Yeah. That works when there's trust.
100%.
So you got to build that trust, and then there's really freedom to take those big swings from the therapist chair and to rewire the brain, which is what you're talking about.
That's right, because this is a bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
So this isn't a 6 sessions and you're done woohoo thing. How long do you normally work with someone with this method?
So we did a study where we dismantled CBASP, and we did a 20-week study. The people that got situation analysis and the people that got the combo were the ones who dropped out of the depression. But we did 20 weeks, and we saw in the combo and in the situation analysis only group. Now, granted, there were only 6 people, so we can't generalize, but we saw them drop out of their depression. And normally you would say, but we were doing crisp, like every session was videoed, and every third session was being evaluated by Jim and another rater from UVA Med School.
That's a lot of data.
That's a
It's a
whole
lot of data.
probably about 30 sessions is about average, somewhere in there. CBASP in Europe, the European Psychiatric Association, so the EPA, this is their gold standard for chronic depression. Like it is wildly appreciated, and he is hailed as a king over there.
Huh.
It's in all the International CBASP Society. I would encourage you all to join if you're interested. We have 12 countries represented, so it's spread all through the world. But Europe is really, especially Germany, but Europe in general is very, very well versed in CBASP.
Yeah.
If you're a counselor and you're interested in and being involved in CBASP, what steps would you take?
I would encourage you to come to the International CBASP Society group and sit in a meeting, join in. I will be there, and there's a group of us from all over the world that meet. I believe we meet quarterly, to every 2 months, somewhere in that rhythm. Come join us in the society. Come dip your toe in. You can go to CBASP, CBASP.org, and that's Jim McCullough's website. You can look at our site, restorationcec.com. Pick up a book, pick up one of the books on CBASP. Give me a call. I love CBASP. It has been such a game changer in my world of walking through chronic depression with these folks, and to be so successful, but to get to use me, the gift that God gave me in me. Not to sound arrogant, I'm made in His image.
Mm-hmm.
So this image bearer gets to go to these folks that are struggling so badly with chronic depression that they just don't feel like they usually come to us when they've been to several therapists and they're like, yeah, nothing works. I tried ECT. We're still doing that. And yeah, for a small handful of people, it may be effective, but I've seen people who have come post ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, where they shock you, right? They'll
Still
come.
a thing.
Yes. And they'll come and they'll say, I tried it. It didn't work. I need your help. I'm not saying that this is the panacea and it makes everybody better, but you work. And it's like when you are struggling with weight and you go to a trainer who says, we are going to do cardio and we are going to eat differently. And we are going to manage your weight. That's what I say when someone comes into for their chronic depression. We are going to learn to manage your chronic depression. There's no magic pill here.
This has been such a good conversation. And
Yeah.
I think for your, is it the International Society? Is that, I think you need a crest with I'm sorry, CBAS on it. I just
Yes,
feel like that. It goes with having an International Society and everything. I
yes,
think you
it
do.
does. I
So
love that. I will take that back to the group. Yes,
please
the
do.
CBASP.
Thank you.
I
Well,
love it.
hey, Dr. Long, it's been great to have you on here. Good to see you again. Thanks for sharing some of your heart, your journey, and approach. I think it's been great. Just really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And Dr. Log, this is exactly what we wanted today. This has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing from you.
Thank you all so much for having me. This has been such a delight.
It says President and CEO Fort Worth. Is that true?
James has siestas every day. They have dinner at 10. They're doing great.
She is do I have to be official now?
No,
To
we're
use that
just
voice.
yeah. Switch to your counselor voice. You'll be fine.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's so good to see you all.
How can you be pleasant as a counselor when you're like, I hate
Oh, yeah.
everything?